Melissa. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, you talk a lot about sustainability. And so, today we're going to be really discussing things to do with that. So, lots of good stuff to cover. And I guess, kind of the elephant in the room that would be great to start off with asking you is kind of I've noticed that you've been talking about this on your Instagram as well. Post COVID, England coming out of lockdown, there's a lot of rhetoric around like being a consumer for the greater good. Can we talk a little bit about that right now? Especially because obviously that kind of really there seems to be some problematic things happening with that statement.
Yeah. So when you say greater good, are you talking about like Boris Johnson's government being like, get out there and shop, but stay home, but shop, but stay home, don't get
Yeah.
COVID, close the pubs, close the schools, open everything.
Yeah.
So I want to say that, first of all, I think we all know that like much of the fashion industry is built on exploitation. And it's not your job to revive an economy that is built on exploitation. That is first and foremost. Like if something makes you feel icky to buy and you have the privilege to not buy it, don't buy it. Don't listen to anyone that's telling you shopping will boost your economy, because you know what boosts economies better? Shopping from small business. I think that small business is going to be the thing that's going to really show us the future if we can get that together. And so I don't think it's your job to revive the high street, essentially. Like I would love for the things that we need to survive, but as far as high street stores, you on your own, girl. Like it's Aja Barber, will not be reviving any system which exploits the labor of Black and brown women in the global South. And I
Yeah.
don't think you should do that either, especially if it makes you feel icky. So when the government says it's your job to like support, I would say put that into small business. And if the government chooses to bail out big business, then, we'll have to grapple with that later. But also, a lot of these companies, especially on the high street in regards to fast fashion, are owned by billionaires. Bail yourselves out.
Yeah.
Aja Barber is not a billionaire. Your wealth is not tied to me at all. So it's not my job to save your company.
Yeah. Topshop doesn't need our dollars. At
H&M either.
all.
I can tell you all the companies that I know that are owned by billionaires: Zara, Topshop, H&M, Uniqlo, all of those companies. And so you're on your own.
Yeah, definitely. So on the other side of things though, have you noticed that there's been kind of more of a conversation around sustainability because of coronavirus and lockdown?
It's been a real heavy combination of like all of the elements coming together. So we've experienced coronavirus and lockdown. At the same time, Black Lives Matter is having a real moment where I want to say we're having a moment, but honestly, Black Lives Matter has been going since 2013. I don't understand why everyone was like, jump on now. But it's kind of like how many people have to die on film before people realize that it's a problem. So I feel a little bit like conflicted there. But regardless of how I feel personally, I'm happy that the conversation is on the main stage. And so when you have that sort of combination of political movements coming together, people changing the way they think, the way they shop, the way they carry on with their everyday life, then yeah, you're going to be having some hard conversations for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of that kind of stuff, when I was prepping for this interview,
Mm-hmm.
I was Googling a lot of stuff around sustainability, and I just saw a lot of white people, like majority white people. And so
Yeah.
I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about like, to me, like from just like that, like hour-long Google search,
Mm-hmm.
it looked a lot like there's been a lot of whitewashing, even like within the conversation of sustainability. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I talk about all the time on my platform is that the most sustainable people that I've always known have been, you know, impoverished BIPOC people. Like my mother is incredibly sustainable. Like she has not I can count the amount of clothing my mother has bought new for herself on probably both my hands in my lifetime. You know, my mother has always shopped secondhand. It was not cool to shop secondhand in the 90s. Like, Aja Barber did not want her white peers knowing that, like, my clothing was bought from thrift stores and was hand me downs from wealthier friends of family we had, or my sister's hand me downs. That sort of stuff wasn't cool. And so I think the concept becomes very whitewashed when all of a sudden the face of it is a white person who sells a lot of clothing on Depop, which, no shade to Depop. Like, I think Depop is great and I'm excited about that. But that can't just be the face of sustainability, because it's just like other things like cultural appropriation, for instance, where it's like, you know, people that are Indian don't feel comfortable wearing things like bindis, but then like a white pop star does it and everyone goes, oh, that's so cool, you know? So it's one of those things where I think if we're actually giving credit where credit is due, we can create movements that are super authentic and actually will like help to mitigate some of the problems surrounding the need for the movement. But if we continue to promote the same voices, to promote the same people, to, you know, make someone the face of a movement where they've actually not done any of the heavy lifting, all we're going to do is continue to perpetuate the problems. Same
Yeah,
cycle over and over and over again.
definitely. So, okay, so say someone's kind of realized that all of the information they have ingesting is very like white lady, white middle class.
Mm-hmm.
So what would your do you have any suggestions for that person who's kind of realized that they've been going about it the wrong way? Is there anyone online that you really like to follow that you would recommend them following instead?
So many people. I mean, Celine Simon of Study Hall, Dominique Drakeford, Emmy Ito of Little Koto's Closet, Rabia Lomas of She Flourished. You know, like, there are so many marginalized people doing cool, exciting work that like you can learn from, and it's literally at your fingertips. Like, if you're on Instagram, you have access to the same people that inspire me daily. So yeah, diversify your feed. Like, if everyone in your feed looks exactly like you and comes from the same socioeconomic landscape that you do, you're not going to be able to learn or change your opinion about anything. You need to follow people that are more marginalized than you so that you can learn about these issues in a very authentic way. Otherwise, it is just the same cycle of who gets to be heard, who gets to speak, etc. So like, yeah, I would say follow people that are more marginalized than you. And then I would also say realize that, like, it's not a marginalized person's job to teach you everything about the oppression that they face. However, if you are really quiet and you listen, you're going to learn so much. Like, people always say, well, how will I learn if I don't ask questions? And the truth is, whenever I go to a person's space who is more marginalized than myself, whether it's a trans woman or an indigenous woman, I generally have a rule for myself that I do not comment unless what I'm commenting is actually helping them in a way which they have asked for help, you know, or if it's something positive. And I generally tend to stay quiet in spaces of people who are more marginalized than myself, but I still learn a ton. And the reason why is because that space is not the place for me to hold the mic. Even if I think my question is like really pressing and really important, it probably isn't. And it's probably been answered a million times too. So like, if I just like keep quiet, stay the course, read the post, read the comments, eventually someone's going to answer my question. And I don't have to like interrupt a conversation between people more marginalized than myself and center myself in that way to get the answer to that question.
Yeah, definitely. And especially because we're now in like an even more digital world with coronavirus,
Mm-hmm.
with social distancing. It's probably not going to go back to normal. So, so many more of our interactions are going to be online. We really need to be, considerate of how we're acting in that space. I was wondering if I know that this is something that you come across a lot with people crossing boundaries towards
Mm-hmm.
you and in your work. And for anyone who's watching this who is experiencing similar things, but doesn't know how to handle it, what advice would you have for them?
I don't know because I feel like I'm constantly repeating myself. Like, hey guys, like, so some of the rules for my post, and I do use Instagram in a different way, and I think more people are sort of veering in a direction of using Instagram, not in the sort of typical like influencer way. Like people would say I'm an influencer, but if anything, I would say I influence you not to buy and not to shop as often. Um, which isn't really a typical influencer because the typical format is that you would get paid for talking about brands, for mentioning brands, for affiliated links. I don't do any of that because I don't want to add to the problems that I talk about. But because I have that rule, and people go, oh my God, it's so great. I feel like I can really trust what you're saying because your space isn't sponsored. Because I have that rule, I also have a rule that I don't talk about brands in my space. Like if I'm not getting sponsorship from this space and it's not supporting my livelihood, then like I'm not going to help people. Like this is where you should shop. This is where I sell my clothing. Instead, I do that on Patreon, which is where I get paid for my work. And I get people just breaking that rule like every single post. And so I would say stay the course. You don't have to be mean. You can be firm but loving. But I also tell my community, like, if you see someone who's like skirting them rules, you tell them, be like, hey, we don't talk brands in this space because Aja doesn't get paid. Like, she's holding this conversation. She is educating a lot of us for free on stuff that like technically she could just take all of her work and put it behind a paywall and be done with it. But like because of that, we should respect her boundaries, especially when it comes to like her space. And it does seem like people seem to have a really hard time with that, and I don't know what the solution is to it. As long as people are like nice, I'm fine with being like, hey, so and so, I don't talk about brands here. One time I had a white woman who got so bad and then she blocked me because I wouldn't tell her where to shop, and then she started tweeting about me and I was just like, right.
Yeah.
That's like worst case scenario.
Yeah, so there's like a lot of entitlement, I feel like, to that people like that attitude that people have towards you and your time.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, while we're on this subject, like I think a lot of people would want to know, like, how do you like take care of yourself when people are being this awful? What are your coping mechanisms?
Screaming into a pillow, screaming into a void. No, I'm just kidding. Standing on the edge of a cliff, just going, ah! No. I take a lot of baths. I take a lot of baths. I do ballet like a few days a week when I'm home. There's no space to do it in my flat, but you know, I make do there. So I dance, I exercise, I try and remember to like check in with friends about stuff completely unrelated to Instagram. Um, and I do a lot of reading. Of course, reading kind of feels like work these days too because I end up reviewing things and talking about them on my platform. So it's kind of like, I guess I am kind of working. It's weird. It's hard to quantify, especially if you exist in an online space, like what's work and what isn't work. And
Mm-hmm.
so I struggle with that. Like my goal this year was to have better work-life balance, and then the pandemic happened and everything just went to shit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, speaking of like online versus real life, is there
Hmm.
what what things can we be doing outside of the online space to be really working towards more sustainability in fashion?
In general, don't buy so much. That's really what it comes down to. And I think universally humans are winding down off of like we were all on a fast fashion high for years. It was just like, I need it, I need it, I need it, and no one was thinking about the consequences, yours truly included. And so the first thing to do is to stop buying so much. I mean, like have you worn your summer dresses this year? Like, I love this dress. I've had this dress for 2 years now. It's wonderful. I haven't given it the wear that I need to because, like, what we do with our lives is clearly changing. Like, my partner and I have not been to a fancy party or a wedding or a fancy restaurant in months. And so the notion of me just continuing to buy dresses, no matter how much I love them, is ridiculous because I'm not going to use them. And so I mean, I do wear them. I wear my summer dresses like around the house and whatever, but I'm not, my social life consists of parks and walks these days. And I think that's pretty universal for a lot of people. So it wouldn't make sense for me to be like, I'm going to get 5 new summer dresses this year. Like, why? Um, so I think the first thing, wind down off the fast fashion. Like the clothing that you have in your wardrobe is good enough, especially for a pandemic. I think we're going to have like a sort of, I think what we're going to see when charity shops do open up again is I think a lot of people are going to be getting rid of their work wardrobes. That's what I think, because like I stopped doing business casual years ago because I realized it just didn't serve me well. Like I refer to like polyester work trousers as shitty work pants. And so I basically made a pledge in my 20s that I was not going to buy shitty work pants anymore. And I held tight to that because like it was not serving me well. Those pants never fit me right anyways, and they always make me miserable. Um, so I would say even when I was still working in the TV industry, which used to be my career, I was sort of getting away from this idea that you had like a separate wardrobe for work and a separate wardrobe for play. I just began to sort of view my entire wardrobe as whole. And so I would never buy something today that I couldn't, that I wouldn't want to wear on the weekend. Like I have a lot of friends that have like a work uniform, and that is not stuff they're ever going to wear outside of work. And I just kind of began to sort of blend the two things together. And I do think because the way we do business, the way we do everything is forever changed. And so I think we're going to have this mass exodus of people just clearing out their work clothes, and then it's just all going to be sitting in charity shops and nobody's going to want it. And so I'm a bit perplexed by that. But yeah, the first thing I would say is like, don't buy anything right now. And if you do buy something, buy it from a small maker. Like, don't give the big people your money because they've not been doing right by you or anyone else on this planet for a very long amount of time. Make them earn your dollars. And at this point, I don't, or pounds. At this point, I don't think that they've done a good job of it. I mean, think about it from this perspective. Like, all of these issues work together because they all tie in. When the pandemic started, do you know who was open? All of the high street was open. Like, were you looking for a maxi midi dress when like the entire government was like, get the fuck off the streets, go home, you're gonna die? Like, nobody was looking for a midi dress. So
Yeah.
why is H&M and Topshop and Uniqlo and all of these stores open? Like, I did not understand why these stores were open. And do you know when these stores closed? They closed when the government offered a furlough package. And so basically they were going to make their employees work until the government said, we're going to pay for 80% of your employees' salaries, which frankly, those stores are owned by billionaires. They could pay that and like be okay. But like, why not make the taxpayer pay for your employees and you can keep your money? And that is why we have to do something about these systems because they suck.
Yeah.
So the first thing I would say is like none of these big brands have earned your allegiance in any way. It's not your responsibility to revive them. The second thing I would say is what do you actually need right now? Like if you're really, really not wearing fancy dress up clothes, then you don't need to buy a dress this summer. You know, like what are you actually wearing? And second of all, third of all, like when we see our friends again, like in a normal setting, we'll all be so happy that no one will be thinking about what we're wearing, you know? So I think now is the time if you've ever thought about getting away from fast fashion, this is your chance. Nobody is looking at what you're wearing, you know?
So are you hopeful that we're going to enter into this new era where people are going to be a little bit more thoughtful about the choices that they make when consuming things?
Mm. I think the people that were on the fence are fully going in that direction. I think that there's a certain portion of the population where they don't give a shit because they don't care about others. Um, there was a tweet that was just so brilliantly put, and I couldn't put it better. And it just said, "I don't know how to make you care about other people." And
Mm,
like, this is not to say that like people that are shopping fast fashion all don't care about other people, because there is definitely, income inequality, like tenfold, 100%. There are people where they don't have other options. I am not looking at you. This is why it's important to talk about intersections and working within your intersection. If you don't have the funds to get off the fast fashion train, I get it. And there's also an issue with, sustainability and fat phobia, because a lot of sustainable brands aren't trying to make anything bigger than the size large. So it's not like every person can wholeheartedly join the sustainable fashion movement. But what you can do is wear the clothing you have in your wardrobe, because that's the most sustainable item of clothing to begin with. I do think a lot of people are trying to make that change, but until the fast fashion, until the sustainability and sustainable fashion movement can really meet people where they're at, it will always be challenging. And I will never not be realistic about that. But I also want to be realistic about the fact that fast fashion as a system would not be as profitable as it is if it were just poor people buying it. Like, middle class people, wealthy people buy fast fashion. Okay. I'm from the DC area. So are you. How many times, like, do you go into a store like Old Navy and see like some upper middle class, mom pushing an entire cart of clothing that her kids are probably going to wear for like one summer, and like that's not poor people doing that. But I've seen that enough to know who's perpetuating this cycle. And if it were, people love to sort of do the cop out of, well, where will poor people shop? And it's just like, it's not poor people who brought this system in place. And so why are we looking at poor people really hard here?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I think that brings up a number of really good points. One being that there's this misconception that sustainable fashion is always wildly expensive.
I think if I didn't know better, I would say the fast fashion companies hired a PR team to put that out there.
I'm sure they did, right? Like,
Yeah,
why not? Like,
totally.
remember how, like, this is totally unrelated, but if like milk at the milk industry,
Mm-hmm.
like, remember back in the day in America, they'd have those like huge, like, got milk posters.
Got milk, or
If the
like,
milk industry organized that entire conspiracy theory to convince everyone that milk was like so healthy for you when it actually isn't,
yeah,
I'm sure that the fashion industry has also done something to make us like have all of these misconceptions.
absolutely. I mean, like, even the cigarette industry did that. Like, I don't know if you watch Mad Men, but like the first season, their client is Lucky Strike cigarettes. And Don Draper has this scientist on payroll, and he's like, the man could disprove oxygen if we threw enough money at him. And it's like his only job is to disprove that cigarettes are linked to like cancer, basically. It's just
Yeah.
like, it's vile. So we know that industries do actually, put a lot of money into, telling half truths about what the industry does. I think right now, a lot of corporations are putting a lot of money into greenwashing. So trying to make their organization seem more environmentally friendly than they are. H&M looking directly at you straight in the face. I think it's entirely a misconception. I think that you have high-end sustainable fashion, which does cost money. You have sustainable fashion, which costs the same as high street fashion, like what you're going to pay at Topshop, Zara, or H&M for like a mid-range dress. And so the issue is people are not educated about the amount of options out there, but instead of realizing that maybe they're just not educated about it, they go, oh, sustainable fashion is expensive. And that does get on my tits, because I know a lot of like small brands that are really, really trying to keep their prices in a place where people can afford them. And it's just up to you as a consumer to find them, rather than saying that sustainable fashion is super expensive. I think that's just a giant misconception. It's really annoying. I get that a lot on my Instagram, and I just delete those comments. Sometimes I'll be like, actually, you don't know what you're talking about. Um, but yeah, I think the thing is, ethical and sustainable fashion will be pricier than a lot of the high street, but that's because that's what needs to happen if we're not going to exploit people. and
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any way to dress that up in a way that makes people feel better. What I will say is the average person who, shops sustainable fashion probably has more clothing in their wardrobe than they actually wear. I know I do, you know. Um, when I shopped fast fashion, I was ripping through clothing at the speed of light and it was making me super uncomfortable. Um, so I guess I would say people act like like a lot of people who can afford to pay more for their clothing act like they can. And that just gets on my nerves because it's just like, okay, you've been trained to think that $5 is fair for a t-shirt. It's not. We have now received new news, which means what are you going to do? Are you going to complain about it and still buy $5 t-shirts? Are you going to not buy $5 t-shirts and instead buy one t-shirt for 20 pounds and treat it really, really well? You get to make that decision. And a lot of people act like that isn't kind of what the equation looks like. But it is. And I get that like it's different for like growing kids. It's different for parents. And I don't have all the solutions. I won't act like I do. But for people like me that have a little bit of upward mobility, one person to care for and dress. I mean, I dress my partner, but um, be realistic about what you can actually do with your money and what you can actually afford. Because
Yeah.
I hear a lot of people that are middle class and frankly sometimes wealthy and privileged being like, I can't afford that, I'm poor. And I want to be like, shut up, you are not poor.
Rich people always try to act like they're poor. I don't
Oh, I
understand.
hate it. I hate it. It is my biggest pet peeve. It makes me just really lose like I knew a girl whose parents like bought her a flat in like a city, and she was like writing in like this online space. She had shared this dress that was from a ethical brand, and she said, does anyone know if Forever 21 makes a knockoff of this? I'm poor. And I just wanted to be like, first of all, but like nobody knows that her parents have money. And so, it's not my job to like tell people, but I just can't be in circles with that because I think that's dishonest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's really, really, really important for all of us to have conversations about the amount of wealth and privileges that you do have and what you can actually do. If you can't move out of your intersection in any way, I get it. I get it. There are some people, poverty is this perpetual system. And for people that live in poverty, it's hard to get out of that. And I talk about that a lot, but there's a difference between being poor and being broke. And that's something I talk about a lot too. I have been broke a lot within my life, a lot. Like, I don't think I made money off of my writing until a few years ago, like good money. And so I know what it feels like to be broke, but I've never been poor because my parents have privilege and upward mobility. We'll never have white privilege, but my parents have educational privilege. So if you have two parents who went to university and you were given the opportunity to go to university as well, you have a fair amount of privilege there and you got to sit with that. Like I've had to move in with my parents 3 separate times within my adult life. Like when I met my partner, I was living in my parents' basement. That's fine. There were times when I was broke. I was never poor because there was something between me and a line of being absolute destitute, you know? And so I think a lot of people mistake being broke for poor, but we need to have a real conversation about that in our society because poverty is systemic and being broke is very temporary.
That's a really good point. I mean, I think with so much of this, and I mean, this goes to kind of so many of the things that are going on right now. It's like there's a lot of unlearning that needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm.
I think that I see some people realizing that being sustainable is considered cool now, but they don't necessarily want to do the
The
work,
work.
and I know,
Isn't that like the age old story of like
white people.
everything? Yeah, white people in particular. Yes, absolutely.
And like, I know, those brands that are like, again, doing that greenwashing, and
Not just
looking.
doing the greenwashing, but doing the black squares. Oh, that was like, whew, like I was thinking, I know this brand that doesn't pay black influencers ain't coming out here trying to capitalize off of a black square moment. Like people got dragged, but rightfully so. Like I'm, for one, not happy with like everything that led to the black square because that's pretty shitty. But like it was very exciting to see people feel very empowered to say to brands, you don't get to capitalize on this because of the way you treat black and brown people behind the scenes. You
Mhm.
don't get to capitalize on this because you're over here in the global south abusing black and brown bodies to make $5 t-shirts, you know, like you don't get this. And so it was, I thought that that was quite cool to see people hold brands to account in that way, and definitely like super necessary and need it.
Definitely. And I feel like it's the biggest amount I've seen of people being galvanized. As long as I've been on the internet, I haven't seen anything else that galvanizing. But on the other side of that, I noticed there were a few sustainable brands that are very popular who
Mm-hmm.
were a lot of information came out about how they were racist within their companies.
There wasn't a single sustainable brand that got dragged during that time period where I was like, oh, not so and so.
Yeah.
This could happen to any brand if you're not actually doing the work behind the scenes. And for a lot of corporations for so long, they've gotten by participating in movements face value only.
Mm-hmm.
And the new consumer demands accountability, which is exciting.
Yeah.
The speed in which these companies are churning out clothing is harming people and the environment. And so when someone says it can be fast and ethical and sustainable, I call bullshit. Because if you're making it that fast, you're also pushing your consumer to consume that quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's be honest. And a lot of brands go, oh, it's not our fault. This is the way the consumer wants to buy. The consumers are like, the brands are pushing me to buy. I got news for you. Brands, it is absolutely your fault. You know what you're doing. Like there's a book that I'm reading in my book club currently called Why We Buy, The Science of Shopping. And it's all about how stores began to hire these scientists to come in and study how their consumers shop with the main goal of getting you to spend more time in the store and spend more money in the store. So if that is something that there's been an entire New York Times bestseller book written about it, you can't say that you're responding to consumer demand when you've created the demand.
Yeah. I just remember like the back in the day, back in my middle school days, the like Abercrombie and Fitch cologne that they would just like
That
inundate
you would
your
be
face
choking
with.
on when you walked past the store.
And because it was like they had this whole theory that if you were like inundated with that scent, you would buy more.
Brands just they do lie quite a lot. They'll be
Mm-hmm.
like, oh well, consumers buy this way. Yes, they buy this way because you push them to buy this way, because you send a daily email that's like sale, 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 get it now or you'll never get it
Mm-hmm.
again. And then like the very next day you're sending the exact same email about a different product. So like
Yeah,
let's not pretend like this has not been created by stores wanting consumers to spend more.
definitely. And I think everything that I'm hearing from this conversation is like, and what I literally just realized is like I need to be a lot more interrogative. Is that a word? And I need to interrogate
Yeah, and
brands
like
a lot more.
ask brands more questions, hold them to account. Here's the thing, and this is another thing that I see. Brands try and humanize themselves.
Hmm.
By humanizing themselves, they try and make it seem like, oh, we are just a little brand. We are two people doing this thing. Instead of we're a massive corporation that employs 2,000 people and we will cut off 300 of those people if we decide that we will make more money that way. Like there's this really great documentary that I recommend everyone watch called The Corporation. It's features Naomi Klein. It came out in like the late 90s or early 2000s. Anyways, what the corporation proposes is that corporations have the right to act like people in courts. However, if a corporation were a person, it would be a psychopath because a corporation can only act in its own best interest, which means that if you were standing in the way of a profit line of a corporation and they have to bulldoze you to get to that profit line. Guess who's getting bulldozed? You are. And so I find that companies do this thing where they really try and humanize themselves with language, social media, to make it seem like they're not a massive corporation with a board of investors. It's all white men that are making billions of dollars off of your buying decisions, and sometimes billions of dollars off of your low self-esteem, you know?
And that's not feminist at
No, that will
all.
never ever be feminist. Like the entire like mission of some fashion companies is to profit off of you never feeling whole. You
Yeah.
never feeling good enough, rich enough, pretty enough, you know? And so when you have those tools, and I do like thank media criticism at university for giving me those tools, then you can actually walk through a mall and really like piece by piece dress down like the type of things that's happening. Then you can walk into a store and like once you have those tools to realize that that's what these companies are setting out to do, then you can actually make a decision. Do I need this dress, or has every single signal that I've received since I've walked into the store told me that I need this dress?
Mm. So this brings up a really interesting question. It's kind of a doozy though, so
Mm-hmm.
feel
I might not
free.
have the answer, and
Yeah,
that's what I tell people. We don't have all
but
the answers.
I would love to hear your perspective on it.
Okay.
So, you and I, when we have previously talked before, I talked a lot about intersectionality. And,
Mm-hmm.
this makes me wonder, like, can you really be a feminist if you're not thinking about sustainability too? Do you have thoughts?
It's hard because I think if you're a feminist and you're an intersectional feminist,
Mm-hmm.
what you will realize is that not all people have the bandwidth to be able to hold this conversation. Like, if Aja Barber had 4 growing kids and lived in a small flat in London, I would not give a fuck about sustainability because I'd be trying to just keep my kids fed and dressed. And so I think that if you are an intersectional feminist, what you realize is that whatever intersection you're at, if you have that bandwidth, it's on you to carry that conversation and also to get your rest because you can't pour from an empty cup. And so I think that people within the intersection to hold the conversation should be holding the conversation. And if you are within an intersection where you know that you can, but you aren't, then I question your feminism. But like, I'm not going to say to someone who is more marginalized than myself in various ways that this conversation is theirs to hold because that's unfair. I think if you're middle class or wealthy, then no, you're not a feminist if you're not thinking about this stuff.
Aja, we've covered so much great ground. Is there anything else that you really want the person viewing this video to know about fast fashion before we kind of conclude our session?
Yeah. So sustainable fashion does not have to be new. The most sustainable garment that you own is what's already in your wardrobe. So wear your stuff and give it a good life. Think about learning how to repair things. Think about going to clothing swaps. Think about buying things secondhand online. I don't care what the brand is, the company can only profit once. So like, okay, say there's a brand you like and like they're not great. Think about buying their stuff secondhand on like eBay or Depop, you know? But like sustainable fashion doesn't have to be this formula where we're all swathing around in $300 dresses because I don't have $300 to spend on a dress. But what it is being more inventive and making use of your wardrobe and really, really using and loving the stuff that you have. And I think the best way to do that is to also really figure out what your personal style is. So few people do that. You know, you can work with a stylist on it. I do that for people. But if you don't have the money for a stylist, just get on Pinterest and make a style board and start figuring out what clothing it is that you like and what you like to wear. And once you get that down, you'll make fewer mistakes in your wardrobe. You won't walk into like a store that's pushing tons of trends and feel like you have to participate. You might look around the entire store and go, there's nothing for me, and leave. And once you do that, you feel really, really empowered. But remember, sustainable fashion it doesn't mean getting rid of all of your fast fashion and replacing it with eco-expensive brands. It means really, really considering who's being harmed by this system and trying to extract yourself from that system as much as possible.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so very last question for you. I ask everybody this because I think it's just good to know how to feel this way. When do you feel most powerful?
Every time someone messages me and tells me that my work has changed the way they shop, and ultimately they've gotten way more political, they're writing letters and, talking to their friends and family. I don't just feel powerful. I feel like, wow, something I'm doing is actually having a concrete positive effect on this planet. And that makes me feel really, really good.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Aja. It's been so wonderful talking to you as usual.
Thank you for having me.